Yeah. So good to see
So
you.
good to see you, and it's good to be here as part of the conversation.
Yeah. We've had historically these conversations over the past, I don't know, a couple years at least,
Yeah, a couple of years. Uh,
approximately once a month.
that's right. Explore different topics, the whole world and fields of people working together.
Yeah. This is something related to practice discussion. That's how I see it.
Mhm. Yes.
Your world, my world, the world's combined, the world's external to that. Yep. So anything pressing on your end? How's your weekend so far? It's Tuesday.
Tuesday. Think it's been a good week. It's just it's busy. I realized today that the kids are soon to be out of school. I think it's this Friday. I may be wrong, but that was kind of interesting to observe.
Yeah, it's the
With
23rd.
the
23rd.
23rd, yeah. So I think Friday, I know the university students are out, but I think the high school students are finishing their exams and the public school kids are out Thursday or Friday this week. I just noticed because the kids were kind of bouncing down the sidewalk this morning with smiles on their faces.
That didn't happen for you?
Well, I just like watching how they go to school, you know. In the spring, it's sort of like they're going to school, but today they're like, I'm going to school and soon I'll be able to enjoy the summer. So I like watching that.
Yeah, that relates in some way to, the nonverbal communication and cues that we provide for,
Hmm.
and everybody's different in how they express themselves for sure, and
Yes.
also how each person connects with their awareness of those cues and message.
Yeah, I think that's been the challenge of people trying to get used to being online, on camera in Zoom. It's sort of like a long learning curve just from being always in the room to now they were offline in this space and now they have a mix of the spaces. So I think that's reading the cues, trying to really read everything as well as what you're hearing. I think that's still a bit of a challenge. It's not quite as easy as people would say as if they were in the room. So I've been watching that, and that's really a interesting learning lesson, especially with today's digital technology, which seems to be advancing at a very fast rate compared to the past.
Yeah, especially on the virtual world, like,
Hmm.
and you and I, we live in the vicinity of each other, yet we're not, right in the neighborhood, basically.
Right, that's right.
So everything's done for
Hmm.
us. We've been doing this virtually for
Virtually.
that period of time. So would you say there's any difference in how you communicate in person relative to virtually?
Hmm. I think in person, I'm with people, I'm moving between people. That's one story. I think virtually, I think the sort of big insight I had in this whole experience was how you set it up. Because for me, in the beginning, I was looking at myself and the other person or the other people, and I just found myself eye checking myself all the time, like, oh, I did this or I did that. And somebody gave me a good clue one day. They said, you can actually set this up so your self camera is off. So you're just looking at the other person as if you're sitting across in a coffee shop or sitting across in a meeting. Found that made a huge difference. It also made me pay more attention to the other person instead of, always looking at myself over there on the right. So I found that a really good lesson in terms of that. And then it, I learned you can focus when you're listening because you're not looking at yourself. So it created the space and then it made it easier to listen.
Or even additionally with that, because you're already aware that that other person's not viewable, in that on that space,
Hmm.
that you tend to have complete commitment to yourself in terms of the other person, rather than
Yes.
yourself in relation to yourself and the other
Yeah.
person.
Yes. That was the dilemma. There was them and there was me and me. It's
You're
way too much to.
you're out of the equation now, so you're just
That's right.
focusing on me in this
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah. Yeah. So I thought that was really very valuable. It was a real good nugget that I learned early in the pandemic, and it stuck with me, and I still do it today. I think the fun part is, when you have a group picture, I have to remember to turn my camera on so I can see myself in the group picture if I want that for myself. But if somebody else is taking the group picture, they still see me in there. So it works well.
Um, you coach somewhere
Hmm.
when you do that virtually, right?
Yes.
And the students are present.
Yes.
Everybody's got their camera on.
Most of them, almost 90% of them, yes.
Some may not, yeah,
Yeah,
and
that's right.
don't, yeah,
That's right.
for different reasons.
Hmm.
So how do you find to keep track? Because isn't one of the things attendance with something like that? So you got to know that people are in it, in participating in some
Hmm.
way, whether they're actively speaking or not, but they're still in the session.
Hmm. I, the thing I found interesting is that um, if you create a mix of small group, large group, I find people participate differently. I find if it's all just one way, then the cameras start to turn off because to them they're just receiving stuff. But when they actually have 5 to 10 minutes of something that will be helpful for them, another 10 minutes to go discuss that with two or three other people. After a while, they begin to realize that they want to leave their camera on because it's being interactive. And I find that really, really helpful. So I sort of have this sort of thing in my brain that says, um, if we're coming back to hear from back from the groups, we want to do that in a way that people can hear it. If we want to really engage people, we want to give them something they can engage in. So a topic, a question, an experience, and then they tend to want to leave the camera on because they want to be involved. So I try to create space that doesn't, I won't say allow, but sort of says to people, hey, if I'm going to be with three other people, I probably want them to see me.
Maybe with the word of the use of the word allow, it's sort of like we control things
Yes.
and we're trying to have everybody filter towards what we want and what's best for us, like as a facilitator or a mediator. Whereas a word I would identify is provide for, and then
Yes.
that gives agency or provides agency for another to decide and determine for themselves.
Yeah, I think that's, I like that word, provide agency, because the key is to create a space that is um, comfortable that people want to leave their camera on. But then, some people aren't comfortable with that at all. So you have to sort of spend some time with them to figure out what would be helpful for them to do that. And that takes time. I guess what I've learned is, um, even myself included, you just can't expect me to jump into technology and I'm ready for center stage. Like there's got to be something that leads up to that. I got to have my questions answered. I don't want to be exposed and things like that. So instead of making that the subject, I think it's easier to actually create space and do experiments and people get to be involved and it gets to be very humane, especially when people start doing this, which means I can't hear you. I can't, instead of saying, are you there? Are you there? So I think people are really good to each other when they know it's not a performance. They're not on a stage. They're in a space. And the thing is, this space is just, we're all learning how to make it work for each of us. And I just find people are very forgiving if somebody's having trouble or somebody's not sure or they miss some information. And and people fill that in, and I think that's okay, especially if something went by like a freight train or wasn't understood.
Yeah, this brings up a few concepts for me.
Mm-hmm.
Safety
Mm-hmm.
and the conditions for providing for safety
Mm-hmm.
for people and their sense of having ownership to self-identify and just determine how they feel safe and not automatically assume, from my point of view, especially as a facilitator or mediator,
Mm-hmm.
that people are going to align with what I say or what I do, don't say and don't do. Um, I just came from finishing, not today, but most recently, in the last few months, finishing work that was involving people who were harmed a variety of ways, sexual harassment, sexual harm, and many of the individuals who were the other dynamic of the equation here, um, they didn't keep, they didn't put the cameras on,
Mm-hmm.
especially at the beginning. And that connects with the concept of safety because I worked for an organization that was about um, had been identified as harmful in the workplace, and these individuals were part of a lawsuit. This I'm okay with from my point of view. It's not identifying specific people, but in some way, if people want to think they know what I'm talking about here, that's okay. Because in some way, actually, I've been trying to think, and this goes off tangent, but connected, and I'll get back to my original point soon.
Okay. Okay.
One thought leads to another,
Yes.
and the brain, is always working. Do we want to keep it from not working? I tend to always think I'm an overthinker, maybe. Nevertheless, the work involved people who were harmed through sexual harassment, sexual harm, suffered, experienced trauma, and I represented someone who's from the same institution that provided for that harm in the workplace.
Okay.
And so trust was not there from the beginning. As an established core principle, because even the people that I was working with were identified a particular way.
Okay.
And here, this will give a little more insight. Class members, they were the product of a class action lawsuit on
Mm-hmm.
sexual harassment. And I worked for the organization, and my intention, I was hired to work with the individuals to try to help them navigate with what was called participation, if they wanted to participate in a program
Mm-hmm.
that was about speaking to and addressing their harm in a positive and productive way. Yet, um, the approach that I took was the expectation that people already were harmed. There was no questioning it, no judgment of that, no second guessing. Their harm was what they experienced, yet it was different and unique amongst each person. So individually, rather than seeing, yeah, they're identified collectively as harmed people, yet they experience within that spectrum of collectivity an individual nature of how they were affected. And then the next step was if they wanted to participate, and if so, in what way individually, based on
Mm-hmm.
the options available that the program provided for. So,
But I think that's a really key point. I know we started with, how we do meetings, but I
yeah,
think I think there's this whole art and science of people having different experiences with conflict. Like you described a very clear one, but it ranges for different people. The thing I know that's common though is generally when people are in conflict, that it's quite upsetting. It's it could be a simple item or a very large item, but it's upsetting to them. And I think when people are willing to engage or make a voice a decision they want to become involved, it is really important to take time to figure out how they want to be involved. And that is a journey in of itself. It's not, okay, we'll see you on Saturday morning at 9. It's a journey. And I think that's part of it. There's all these things that happen. Then, somebody says, oh, go to mediation. And it's like mediation is going to solve it. And then there's a little intake process, but the main show is the mediation. And when they're done, they'll be fine. My experience is that people often need a lot of conversation about what they think would be helpful, even being in a mediation. So instead of, I agree to go to mediation, and sometimes they need support. When I say that respectfully, I say they want somebody to listen to them about where they're at. That's one. So that's a whole story in itself. And then there's a whole story about where do they want to go with this? Um, they may say maybe in another month when or if I could get a roadmap, or if you could listen to my roadmap, but there's a whole conversation about what they think is next. Now you take the other party and you have a repeat performance, okay? And what I've experienced in my time is that sometimes some people have agendas. If I meet with this person, these are my agenda items. And one of the things I've done is I said, okay, let's just list your agenda items. And is this how you would state them? And then when I meet with the other party, we go through the da 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 da, and then they say, if I were to do this, I say, what's your agenda items? And the simple thing I've done in some cases, I said, I'm going to write back to both of you with the list and let me know if there was a topic or two topics on the list you would like to tackle just to try to have a conversation.
A curiosity to check in with you.
That's right.
When you put this list, because
Mhm.
you're you've observed and experienced from them,
Mhm.
how do you display or convey those topics? Is it individualized or subjective, or
I,
is it collectively and interspersed
I
among?
try to I try to give it back to them as they gave it to me. So I don't summarize it or thematically analyze it. I say this is the list. And what I'm trying to really give them a chance to see is that their words made it on a page. Their words made it on the list. The other person's words made it on a list. And that creates a different starting point about what they would like to talk about. Because what I generally say to them is, this is your conversation. And it's just a conversation. It's just a conversation to start. And it's just to see if there's a chance that you two would want to talk to each other if this was the topic. And my experience has been when they see that, they've sort of made a micro move, as I like to call it, that, this is a list. And 9 times out of 10, they'll say, we want to do number 4. And I only number them because that's basically the order. They're not in any order of priority. And the thing I find interesting is that they'll talk about number 4, then they'll drift to number 7, then they'll dance over to 8, then they'll come back to 1, and then they'll come back to number 4. So what I find interesting in that conversation is that they're kind of building their own roadmap. That list is just the starting point. And what I find helpful about that is that they're now listening to each other and letting themselves navigate around that. And that's what the list to me is really about in terms of a conversation. So I take the pressure off that they have to resolve this by the end of this. I don't take them through this whole thing that they have to, do it and close each item. But I do focus on the fact that it's helpful that they're now talking, their blood pressure can come down, they can actually see each other. And I say, okay. And the other thing I'm a big fan of is I always try to figure out at the end of anything to time box the last 10 minutes. Because I say to people in that last 10 minutes, no matter where they are in the conversation, this is a great time to check in and say, hey, today we only have 10 minutes left, but that doesn't mean this has to stop. What would you like to do moving forward? What kind of game plan do you see? You have lots of options. We can come back and have another conversation. You may want to do something, but you tell me what would be most helpful so that when they leave there, they have three fundamental things. We played with the list. We didn't have to follow it in order. We could go all over the place. Number two, we got a chance to hear each other and it wasn't the usual volcano. And number three, we can think about the next steps. We're not being ordered to the next steps. Now, that to me is a very different piece. So it's not um, nice and structured. It's not nice and closed, but it has a level of flow to it that works. And and it's just interesting to watch when people actually do that. In some cases, we do the first part, and I'm not even at the mediation, but they get to go away into the mediation with a different perspective. So that's really, I think, the important part to say, okay, I there's different perspectives. What are you hoping to be heard on? What are you hoping to share? So those are perspectives that are helpful. But I think that ties to your point earlier. It's I know there's lots of mediation cases that are bang bang book to end, go through a structure, end. I get all of that. But I think the more important thing is when people move through a process that they can see, hey, I got the things out, I got this, I got that, and they can make incremental micro steps. I think they start to rebuild both the relationship and their creative thinking about what could be done because there's space there. And that's what I think is that for me is what's really important for them. There is space. It's not time's up.
Yeah, my brain's going a mile a minute because it tends to go, especially getting into these kinds of practice discussions
Mhm.
and approaches on the work we do.
Mhm.
And as part of our history together, we've had
Mhm.
all these series of conversations on different areas of practice and approach. And I've mentioned to you about some of my uh, firm commitment to particular words
Yes.
that identify certain things and message certain things. And my experience is that people pick up their own sense of that word and what they mean for them.
Mhm.
And so one question I like to ask in a conversation that's dealing with skill building or knowledge building is who's responsible for the messaging?
Mhm.
The sender, the speaker, or the receiver, or the person on the other end? And when I think you and I first met online on a virtual space,
Yes. Yes.
I think I brought forward, and I've mentioned since, about my aversion to the word the in terms of a preface or adjective for this is the way we do things. This
Yes.
is the way to do things. And I have a strong belief and adherence to not utilize that word, the. Instead, what do I do? Okay, so I say this is a way
Mhm.
because I find there are a variety of different ways that need to be provided for the conditions that are relative to the individual and what works best for them, what suits them. And rather than a cookie cutter approach, as I'll say, that people need to fix into how I, as a practitioner, would approach it or express it, say, hey, that's their commitment to me,
Mhm.
I would do the inverse or reverse. I don't know what you call it, but to say, hey, how about adapting to the person you're working with and the
Mhm.
conditions they need in terms of connecting with the approach, the practice, and what works for them ultimately, and trying to open up space within them. So more client centric, customer oriented. You want to use that term? I don't, but client centric is where it's filtered on the person approach
Mhm.
for the other person. It's not about me. I'm a means to assist another to assist themselves.
That's a good way to put it. Um, and that's what I think the challenge is when working with people in conflict. There's a tendency to jump. How do I do this? Jump to the method that will get you the solution. Now, the problem is, I don't know what their solution is, and they need space to figure out what they want to do moving forward. And that's different than, well, they need to settle or they need to like each other. Now, as soon as I say that, they need to, yes, I've disassociated myself, but I've imposed something on them that
Mm-hmm.
I have no way of knowing what's going on. And so that's why it's I think the art and science of listening to people is really tricky because you have to be prepared in going into this that you're not coming with an answer, either in content or process. If you let them design, quote unquote, process the steps they want to go through, then that shifts the whole thing back to what's possible from their perspective, what's practical from their perspective. Now that's a different headspace, if I can put it that way. And I always find it interesting because you look at other structures. If you look at the legal structure, you don't go to court and the judge rules in 17 minutes. And in fact, the more complex, it could take more time. There's a lot of work that's involved with that. And yet I find people often say, well, mediation is much more efficient because it's faster than the court. And I always have problems with that statement because I'm not sure that's an accurate comparison. I think the more challenging thing is when people are struggling for long windows of time with conflict, and the real issue is that it could have been dealt with earlier instead of later. That it has to come to some sort of um, problem point, then we'll call in mediation or support a conversation or investigation. I'm saying we see enough signals way down here before we actually see up here. But the important thing is I can't change the past, but you can create a space at this moment where that person can reflect, can think about what they're into, how it's impacted them, why it irritates them, and what and after that reflection have a chance to think about what would they want to do next, not what I'm going to tell them to do next. And there's the shift. Now the challenge is that takes time. In a society that lives by the 30-second flip of the screen, I'm talking like that's mega time. However, if something took 9 months to become a miss, why would it move to agenda in 30 minutes or less?
It, you know, all these thoughts are, your
Hmm.
expressions, my expressions. I'm sure it's prompting further turning of the wheels, churning
Hmm.
of the wheels
Yes.
with thoughts about what we do, what we don't do, how we do it, how we don't do it. My firm belief that I latched onto early on in my evolution and
Hmm.
transformation with the practice of this work,
Hmm.
which is a big sphere,
Yes.
connecting back to my concept of aversion to the word the.
Hmm.
And this is an approach. This is a way, yet it's adaptive
Hmm.
to different people, different
Hmm.
situations. It's not a cookie cutter. I'm not expecting people to fit in. It's the firm belief that as a practitioner, a professional, who am I doing this for?
Hmm.
Am I doing it for myself as that practitioner? Or who am I doing? Is it for the person that is looking to uh, get some kind of assistance? Someone who hires you or
Hmm.
someone who's identified you to assist them because they can't deal with their situation any longer and they want something else. So, as a practitioner, my intention is not to go in and apply, this is what you need to do. It's really to learn, unpack from them what's going on, what's not going on, how it's going on, how it's not going on, to then see how to get deeper into the weeds with their interests, which they may express on a simple level. When I say simple, it's not simple, but it's just
It's
clearly, you know, what they believe. I think that there's always something much more deeper that's underneath or behind the backstory that provides space for further understanding and development and unpacking for the person. So believing and approaching it that they, the individual has ownership, and I want to figure out with them, connecting it back to the original comments today about safety and trust and what we represent when we first connect with people. Especially when I worked for the organization, I was seen as somebody who was part of that same organization, which technically I was. Yet I was seen as being part of the harm or one of the harmers because I was part of that same institution that provided for the harm. So trying to rewire and present new ways of viewing myself with in terms of interjecting with them in their lives so
Mhm.
that they could figure out, well, do they feel safe? Can they trust me? The assumption I took was they wouldn't trust me at the beginning. I would need to unpack with them and build a relationship, a rapport, communication, trust, safety. And everybody's different. Everybody's unique. That concept of individuality. Yes, there's a collective identification or labeling of people, yet within the approach, it's individualized. And, going back to connect some of our other stuff, keeping the camera on or not. I can tell you lots of stories, nevertheless.
Well, it points to, I would say, some underlying values that we bring to the practice. Um, when I think of values, I think of one of them is respect for that person. Um, we respect that they are who they are. They have their own points of view. They have their own thoughts, and it's my job in that situation to listen. And when I come with that value, I know from the get-go that's my job. As tempted as I may be to have a solution, that's not my job. It's my job is to respect. That's a very important point. I think another value is time. Um, as I said earlier, when one is prepared to spend time with a person, it sends a very different signal than making people fit the time. And that's a very it's subtle, but you often see it. You're booked for 30 minutes and therefore your 30 minutes are up. But what do you want to do next? Okay. But given all the things we've seen them come in with, was it really real to think it was going to be done in 30 minutes if they started to talk? if they saw the respect and they were able to talk, we need to think differently about that. So time, I think, is a very important, how we appreciate time. Number three is ambiguity. Instead of pushing for clarity, holding the ambiguity and complexity gives them a space to wander around. Whereas I find too often we don't want to hold that. We go to direct line inquiry. Well, then what happened? Then what happened? Then what happened? Then what happened? Is that the sequence? Yes. Okay, moving on to the next thing. Not really, because they don't remember it that way. They're going to remember something that happened and something that made them really mad and something that happened. I don't know how that dance will be, but it's going to be for that individual. So that's a value we can bring in terms of being with them. And I think the other one is we can also be curious enough that as we're listening and helping them listen to each other, there's sometimes we can provide a little bit of clarity. Just simply saying, so I'm just checking and you're talking about this topic? No, 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 we left that one. We're on to another one. Okay, I thought something shifted, just wanted to check it. Carry on. Not, you failed to summarize that one and make a decision on it. What are you going to do next? That's, that is not helpful because it breaks them from the flow of what they're talking about. They'll get to the summary later. They'll get to what they want to do. But I think the key is that's really trying to help them. And those are some of the early values that come to my mind. I'm sure there's 5 to 7 of them, but I think sometimes in methodology, we don't investigate the underpinning values that hold how you deal with that methodology with a group of people. Sometimes I think we just learn a methodology and then try to twist it to apply to everybody. But the real problem is we don't understand the underpinning values that actually support my behavior when I'm working with people. So, for example, people have said to me, "You're very quiet." I am. And so I say to people, they say, "Well, what are you doing?" "I'm listening." And oh, I said, and I often will say to people, "So I've heard a lot of things. Would you like a summary? Would you like a perspective? What would be helpful for you at this point?" But that's a big thing I continue to learn is that listening is very powerful, especially if you created space for people to have the type of conversation they want to have. And I've also learned that in that respect bucket, it's really important to respect the fact that the topic may be brutally difficult and there may be long pauses of silence. And one of the lessons I've learned in the last couple of years is silence does not confer agreement. Silence is just silence. And I often tell colleagues and friends, I say, it's like a computer. In the old days, you have to wait for the program to finish. I said, that old hard drive be spinning and spinning and spinning and nothing on the screen. And then boom, an answer would come up. All that taught me was the computer was thinking. It wasn't that it wasn't fast enough, wasn't working. It was working, but there's a time gap. So silence tells me people are thinking, pondering, exploring, maybe fuming. I don't know. But when the time's right, they'll say something. And if they're not sure, you give them you give them out of that. Like they may say, you know what? I need coffee. I need coffee at this point. You say, well, that sounds good. So we could take a break at this point. Yep. Okay, we'll take a break and come back. But the point is, when people realize they can have time to think, that's a gift of the process. That is very different. So it's not a process that runs like a smooth train. It's a process that runs and they're the conductor of the train. And it may stop 7 times, it may stop 6 times, or it may stop 2 times.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack with, it relates to the power of silence
Mhm.
and people's discomfort or uncomfort with silence. And how many times I recall in coaching or teaching people's discomfort with there's some not chatter going on. There's not some noise that you can is audible.
Hmm.
It may be audible within a person's head, but we don't have a microphone in a person's head to hear all the
Right.
chatter that might be going on. So a lot of the students would like to uh, take a shortcut, and they would take the sense of expressing that I know how to fix this. I know what
Yes.
to do for
Mhm.
the people. I've heard enough that I know what the resolution can be and would be best to be, thus the outcome. Going back to a lot of my earlier stuff today, agency. Is it you're doing the approach for you or for them? Who's it going if you decide that it's as a practitioner that this is what you're going to tell them, then if they follow that or adhere to it, my sense of experience is that it might work for a short period of time. Soon after, it's going to start to unravel because it hasn't had the conditions provided for that people are committed to it, feel safe with it, trust it for the long term and ongoing. And it's really then they'll say, well, that's what you told me to say, or that's what I heard you telling me to say, rather than this is what I want to do for myself in terms of the change that might be best needed for working things out collectively, even individually. So it's really important from my point of view, no shortcuts, and the belief that I'm here to provide a space with conditions that are conducive to the individuals as I've worked with them to generate for my awareness on how to work with them with so that I'm not fitting them into my box.
Hmm.
What would I do as a human being? Well, I'm trying to be as much more aligned overall with a consistency of my own approach in life as a human being with the practice
Hmm.
in terms of being a human being
Hmm.
as a
Hmm.
professional
Hmm.
so that I don't need to second guess I don't even need to think about it. It becomes so much more natural. And I think that resonates a lot with some people, not everybody,
Hmm.
because it's not for me the way to do it. It's a way to do it.
Well, I think that connection between practice and one's individual way they relate to the world is something it shifts it from a bunch of methods in a box to a way you live in life. And that's, I think, that's part of the challenge right now is that people, this is over here in this box. If I get all these things done, then I can add that box. This line drives me crazy to my toolkit. And I keep visualizing these 16-wheeler trucks of people driving them in their toolkits in the cargo bay. And it's so deep and so broad, you don't even know after a while. But it's interesting that when you take time to figure out how do I apply these things in my life that align with my values of working with people and relating to people, it does shift one's perspective to take the time to hear people. I always tell people I love going to different places like grocery stores and saying hello to the staff. They always smile at me like, really?
What for? What are you doing that for?
And yet, I've met some great people in those places. And, all it took was a habit of saying hello and checking in. And then, yeah, I'm doing good. It's maybe 30 seconds. It's not that long a detail. But for me, what's important, I want them to know I recognize them for who they are.
So what about the humanity that you're bringing into that relationship, regardless of where it's
Hmm.
located or
Hmm.
situated,
Hmm.
and whether it's, long term, short term, spontaneous or not, it's the concept of consistency
Yes.
and aligning with that and your values and being true to oneself. Always, you know,
But
people know
that's
what they're going to get. Yeah, go ahead.
that's the work. That's the work. It's when it shifts from just a transaction to a lifestyle because it's the values underpinning it are the same. Now, that to me is always the interesting part. If you have one set of values for work and one set of values for yourself, then going to work is always stressful because you're doing an alignment game when you come in the door and you're doing a disalignment game when you come out. And that sort of piece of the puzzle, I think, is part of the problems that people experience in workplace, in community, in associations, in organizations, is that I've always found this tension is, like we have these beautiful sets of values on the company wall or the organizational wall or and then I ask the question, but how does that translate in how we conduct ourselves, if that's the right word, or are ourselves with our colleagues, the people we serve, and the community we live in? Now, the problem I find is usually that thing on the wall is that's about as far as it's gone. Everybody's trying to do their best to fit in, so they've sort of figured out a cultural norm list of values, and then there's theirs. And that's why I often say we wonder why people in the workplace find themselves in conflict. Well, it starts when they come to work because it's like switch, act, de-switch, go home. And that's stressful.
It's a constant energy, and it's not always the
Yes.
most productive.
Hmm.
I do find that working within stress can
Hmm.
provide for the energy to be productive. At the same time, it's like to navigate with how you are approaching, experiencing the awareness, especially of self in relation to
Hmm.
another, of each moment as it happens and how it doesn't happen and what to do to to build a continuum of happening.
Yes.
And it's a lot of thought. Um, it has its impact, which that's why I think thought is there to
Hmm.
have it make a difference and be a difference to provide for some change. So I look at things through the world of change. It's a constant, ever present, constantly evolving experience. So I believe in that whole concept of transformation. And if one was to use an active word, transformational, rather than the
Hmm.
word transformative. For me, transformative is where things have happened different from what they were before,
Hmm.
and it sort of puts a stop. It's an endpoint. Whereas using the tail end of AL,
Hmm.
transformational, it's an active, ongoing, ever-present uh, reality.
Hmm.
So I'm
Hmm.
I'm into this transformational aspect of life rather than transformative. And I know we've had conversation in the past about the concepts of transformative relative to transformational, and I think even I spoke about that when we first met online.
That's right. Mhm.
And I don't see an endpoint with life. It's a continuum of change.
Well, I think the continuum of change is sort of um, conceptually understood, practically not wanting to go through it. That's what I experience with people. They're like, "Oh, change is great," and then when you're going through it, they're like, "No, no, 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 no." And I think part of it is if we go back to our earlier part of the conversation, is that we never talk about change in terms of how you will be different at the end of the change. And if that difference means something to you. So we hear change in the workplace, they're changing from this to that, da. It's going to be great for the organization. The challenge, I think, sometimes is it's not really clear to people about why am I going through all of this to simply put this information over here to there. So the concept of constant change, constant learning, constant rethinking of oneself in that which they find themselves in, I think it's always been up against this hard rock of, well, if you got it right the first time, you can do it that way till you die. It doesn't have to change. Whereas the real reality is we're changing every day. And, I talk about kids in school, like last year they were this tall, this year this tall, and now they're taller than me, and now they're adults. So change is not fixed. It's dynamic. However, our reaction to change, I think, is the thing I find most intriguing to watch because it's often an affront. It is sort of what starts to change. It's an affront to what we thought didn't need to be changed. It could be in ourselves, it could be in our workplace, but it's that piece. And I think that's the part people struggle with. They really, we got to change this. We got to change this. And so I think of AI right now. You know, 5 years ago, AI was like something on a CBC night news special. Now today, every software you look at's got AI and con, and it can do this, can do that. But one of the things I'm learning is that people are trying to derive the benefits from it, but now they have to learn to talk to it. And I thought that is a really interesting dynamic. You have to talk to AI and listen to what it says and evaluate what it says. Now, wow, there's a little circle that nobody talks about. They just talk about it's going to simplify the world, make it easier. But really, that you have to validate and evaluate what it says and then determine in of yourself, what do you want to do with this? It's not like we can substitute the challenges and difficulties with AI. Now I come back to the real life human beings. If AI is asking us to evaluate what it said and listen to what it said, we as humans should be the masters of that art. Software shouldn't have to tell us that, just because I spitted this out, it's probably not accurate, and you should actually read through it and feel free to add any changes you think are necessary. And yet we're not doing that as human beings.
Well, if I'm hearing,
Yes.
you're making a statement that if we're applying this approach with our relationship,
Hmm.
our interactions with us as human beings, with machines, machine
Hmm.
learning,
Hmm.
and they're going to learn, why in some way are we not applying that same mindset and approach for ourselves that we're constantly evolving, changing,
Yes.
learning, and hopefully trying to acquire new insights, awareness with through experience and training and
Yeah,
education.
that's right.
Why are we not doing that for ourselves?
And I think in part, um, AI forces us to talk to it or write to it in a way that it can hear the question. So, we have to learn a language of being able to say something and wait for an answer. Say something and wait for an answer. If we write a long, convoluted thing, it kind of gives you an answer, but the answer is all over the place because and I think sometimes as human beings, you put in the emotional aspect, and sometimes we're listening to people who are very upset. They're very upset. They will use anything to express that upset state. They will describe things anywhere ranging from what they said to what they heard, how they felt, how did like you get like it's a huge mural board of different things. ChatGPT doesn't do that well with that. Okay. And so I take a signal from that is that as human beings, that's something we can do, but it requires a different skill of listening, not criticizing, not can you slow it down, not can you just take it down a notch. It's really listening to what people are expressing in relationship to something they received, experienced, heard, or felt. And that requires a skill set because it's messy, it takes time, it's not resolvable. Okay. And at best, the person may say at the end of all that, well, I finally got that off my chest. What were we here to talk about? And that's the I think the human dynamic of the skill of listening, creating the safe space, of taking time to be present and being respectful. However, that's challenging. That what I just said is easy
Yeah.
to say, but it is challenging.
To apply, to do as a human
Yes,
being. I mean,
yes, yes,
a
yes.
machine,
It just says I don't know what to do with it.
yeah, because it's been programmed a certain way with
Hmm.
particular pieces of information, and it's responding, I guess, in some way. Does it react?
No, it's
Hmm. Human beings react
hmm
and respond,
hmm
which we can go unpack those two concepts. But I think we'll figure this one out. We'll talk about something next time.
Yeah.
It's like it, it's it's a struggle for human beings to really challenge themselves to continually change, and yet at the same time they struggle with change. That's what I my major observation from experience of doing workshops, trainings, processes. People struggle with change, and what if a an AI platform or
Hmm.
said to they we ask them a question, give us this, it responds back with what we asked, then it added another question. What are you going to do with this information?
Nation. Well,
How are you going to evolve and transform?
that's right. And that's the thing is that change is constant. It has its ups and downs. It is over time, and it's part of who we are as human beings. If we didn't have change, I think we'd all be still sitting at the daycare, waiting for somebody to pick us up. So I think that's something we should pursue again in the next round because I think this is getting to one of those questions that is really fundamental because we're not talking about the methodology, we're talking about the human condition. And I think that human condition is the real key to really understand our human condition, their human condition, and are we willing to be in that space? Are we willing to support that space and understand that we don't control that space? There's the when I say control, we don't. You're doing this for 5 minutes. You're doing that for 10 minutes. We don't control that space as much as people tell us they want that level of discipline to make sure things get done. I tend to sort of go, yes, there will always be those few that want a complete structure, a time frame, what you're going to get done, da da da. But sometimes you go into a situation and from the get-go it isn't going to be over by 11:30. It's just no, it's not going to be over. You can explain that to people 16 different ways. You can talk about the evidence, you can talk about past practice, you can tell them stories. when 11:30 comes and you're still only 4 minutes in, they sort of get the message because the voices in the room needed to be heard. And, as the size of the voices in the room grow, the time to respect that goes up.
Speaking of time, I know we're probably at
Oh,
our time here.
well,
I,
this is.
I would say just a quick thing,
Mhm.
obviously you have an opportunity to build upon
Yeah.
this. That with control, it's about limits.
Yes.
Whose limits and how's that structured? How's that organized? Who controls that too? Controlling the control. So lots more to still talk about, obviously, in our
Yes.
world together. So
Well, I think we've had a very good round one conversation, and there's other topics, but this has been good.
yeah, and let's obviously do it again. I say
Definitely.
obviously, I'm
Yes.
projecting onto you.
Yes.
That's an invitation, that's a request actually
Hmm.
too.
Hmm.
So let's do it and
Yeah.
we'll figure that out. And so until next time.
Yes. I'm going to stop the recording.
All right.
And it's
Okay.
gonna now it's gonna